Welcome to Franklin Covey's C-Suite Conversations. My name is Patrick Leddin, and each week I have the honor of sitting down and talking to an executive leader. I learn about their life, their work, their career, the struggles they've overcome, and the successes they've achieved, all with one thought in mind, to help you, our listener, on your journey. Today, I'm joined by an iconic leader, Garry Ridge of the WD-40 Company. Garry was the chairman and CEO of the company. He's also known for taking the company from more than just a blue and yellow can that everybody's familiar with, but to a cultural blueprint that every organization around the world can look at and learn from. During his time at WD-40, Garry created what he called a tribal culture, one grounded in trust, learning, accountability, and heart, and made it a place where the values weren't just something written on the wall, but something acted on every day. And people saw it not just as a business success, but as a human one. In our conversation today, we're going to talk about how do you create a culture that endures and how values can guide your decision and why leaders are both keepers of and maintainers in so many ways of the clarity and kindness of an organization. Garry Ridge, thanks for joining me today for a C-Suite conversation.
Hey, g'day, Patrick. It's a delight to be with you. Thank you for inviting me along.
Oh, it's a delight to have you here. And I have to say right from the very beginning, people recognize your accent's probably a little bit more exciting and interesting than mine. Could you tell a little bit about where that accent came from?
Yeah, I'm an Aussie. I was born in Sydney, Australia, and I moved to the United States in 1994, actually. I started with WD-40 in Australia in 1987. And then moved to 94 and then had the privilege of becoming the leader in 1997. So 25 years as a public company CEO, and I survived.
Yeah, how does that even happen, right? I see the tenure is like 18 months or 2 years. How did you survive for that long?
Well, maybe I just kept my head down. I don't know, but I think it was because we were building something fantastic, and we had a dream to take the blue and yellow can with the little red top to the world, which we did. But more importantly, we built a culture that really did recognize that people matter and that people want to belong. And I think today, Patrick, business has a real opportunity, and that is to create cultures where people go home happy. I often say, imagine a place where you go to work every day, you make a contribution to something bigger than yourself, you learn something new, you're protected and set free by a compelling set of values, and you go home happy. Happy people create happy families create happy communities create a happy world, and I don't think anybody'd argue with me that a little happier world right now would be a good thing.
Yeah, I definitely think a little bit more happiness would be great for all of us probably at this point. But I'm imagining there's people listening to this right now going, okay, Garry, that sounds nice, but and I'm at a place that we're 20% engagement. If we were to take a survey, we're like 20% engaged, and you guys were like north of 90%. I mean, what is it? How does that even happen? How do I get from where I'm at to that?
Well, it's simple, but it's not easy, and time is not your friend. I have a friend of mine who owns a chain of Ashley furniture stores out in Charlotte, and he has a wonderful saying. He says, culture is not a microwavable event. It takes a crockpot approach, which is so true. So what do you need to put in the crockpot? Well, you have to have a people first mindset. And we talked about being coaches in our organization, not managers. You come to work someday, Patrick, and the first day of work, I say, "G'day, Patrick, I'm your manager." How does that feel? Well, no, it doesn't feel good at all. So we said we want to be coaches, and coaches there are there to help people win. You have to have brave accountability and behavior. You have to have a clearly defined and authentic purpose. You have to have a hierarchical set of values. You have to have a transparent and simple vision. You need to take fear out of the organization by not having failure, but by having what is magic, and we called it learning moments. And then there's got to be belonging, acceptance, and connectedness within the organization. And finally, you've got to care about your people. You've got to be candid with your people. You've got to hold them accountable, and you've got to expect them to be responsible.
Did you learn that? I'm just curious, like I want to explore all of that, but where did you learn that from? Did you like learn that from your own childhood? Do you have some experience? Was there a mentor, or did you just kind of figure it out through the school of hard knocks? How did you get to this point?
I think all of the above, but the real learning came from Just after I became CEO in 1997, and in fact, my second year, I went back to school. I did a master's degree in leadership at the University of San Diego. And that's where I met my dear friend and my mentor, the guru of servant leadership, Dr. Ken Blanchard.
Mm.
And Ken, I went through this 2 year master's program because Ken said most master's programs get people in the head. We got to start getting people in the heart. And so I owe a lot of what I've learned and then what I was able to put into practice to the mentoring of Ken. And Ken's, in his mid 80s now. In fact, I had lunch with him yesterday, and I still recognize him as being one of the most influential people on my leadership point of view and also in life.
It's so interesting how you phrase it like that about the heart, because with the Franklin Covey Company, Stephen Covey talked about the whole person and the idea that, yeah, I've got a brain and I've got a back and I've got hands, but I also have a heart. And it's the same kind of insight there in regard to recognizing I'm leading a whole person, not just something producing a widget. It won't be long until we do have, many of us will have under our stewardship, depending upon your role, robots that will be out there producing something. But there's something different between a robot and a human being.
Absolutely. And again, as I said in the beginning, you know, people want to know and feel like they belong. They want to know and feel like they matter. And a lot of organizations don't do that. As you know, I just wrote a new book. It's called Any Dumbass Can Do It. And the first chapter is about the title of the first chapter is Are You Okay? So how often do we as leaders spend time really understanding how our people are? Are they okay? And it's a sin, really, when you think about it. About 70% of people who go to work every day are disengaged. Well, Aristotle, who was born in 384 BC, said, pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. So, we're pretty slow learners that our job is to really do what we can. And a lot of people think great cultures are popcorn, pizzas, and ping pong tables. It's not that at all. People want to do meaningful work and they want to be respected and they want to have freedom within in the organization to do what they need to do.
Well, I got to tell you, when I saw the name of your book, Any Dumbass Can Do It, it gave me a lot of hope.
Well, I am the dean of dumbassery. You know, that's what I am. I love Adam Grant, who you may know. He did a lovely endorsement. He said, it's not every day that you come across a CEO who aims to be the dumbest person in the room. Garry Ridge's take on leadership is as refreshing as it is rare.
What do you think? What do you think it is about that in regard to, we think about like executive presence, being taught about how a leader should carry themselves and how you can kind of show up in situations. But it seems in some ways a little bit, the way we explain it or think about it, sometimes it's almost the antithesis of being able to say, I don't know. How do you help leaders kind of thread that needle a little bit?
Well, I don't know are the three most powerful words I ever learned in my life, because what our role is as a leader is to not be the smartest person in a room. Certainly, we have to have a heart of gold and a backbone of steel. There's no doubt about that. We have to have executive presence. We're there to, guide the ship, if you will. But the amount of knowledge that's in a room of really engaged people is enormous. So it's our job to unlock that. And you know, not one of us is as good as all of us together. So I think you've got to get comfortable with it. And I many times I was in situations where I used to introduce myself as, "G'day, I'm Garry Ridge. I'm the consciously incompetent, probably wrong, and roughly right chairman and CEO of WD-40 Company, and I need all the help I could get." Well, don't you think people wanted to help me then because they felt that they could add value and meaning?
It's funny you say that, because that's a wonderful line as you went through that. It just made me think about how I've talked to leaders in the past, or when I'm maybe providing a bit of coaching or conversation with somebody who's, struggling in their role a bit. And I'll say, if you just go tell your team members, however big your team is or whatever that looks like, just tell your team members, hey, I'm struggling with this. I could use some help on it. You'll be surprised how many of them will step up and give you help, because believe it or not, they want to see you win.
Absolutely, they do. And unfortunately, what happens is we have these people, these leaders who I call soul-sucking leaders. In fact, I created a little doll. This is Alec, the soul-sucking CEO of Fear Inc. And Alec, or it could be Alice, and Alec has some behaviors that create this fear mentality in organizations. His or her ego eats their empathy instead of their empathy eating their ego. They're a micromanager. They think they're corporate royalty. They don't like to get their shoes dirty down with the people. They like a fear based culture. They're a master of control. They think they know all the answers, and they do, even the wrong ones. They don't value learning. They must always be right. They hate feedback, and they don't keep their commitments. And these are attributes that, are alive. And in fact, I probably had some of these in a level of abundance before I went back to school and back in, the year 2000, and sort of realized that my job is to bring out the best of others. And if my behavior isn't doing that, then I have to change.
That epiphany moment you said, like, you went back to school and you figured this thing out. I figured that out a little bit better. That epiphany moment is kind of interesting, right? Because you might, like, I could look at myself, or someone listening right now could look at themselves and go, yeah, I've got these pros and cons about me, right? I've got some things on that list that I do, and then other things I do the right thing, if you will. But what I have right now, at least I know it, and at least I know that it's gotten me to where I'm at right now. The ability to then unpack that and say, okay, I'm going to consciously discard some of these things or change. I mean, that's a tough exercise sometimes to go through. And I guess I'm wondering if there's somebody listening right now, they go, okay, I kind of know I got some good stuff and some bad stuff, and I have to kind of excavate that bad stuff and address it to be a better leader. What would you say to them about, like, hey, here's why it's worth that dig?
Well, again, it's because, you're going to be a better leader for the people you have the privilege to lead. And as I said, this is simple, but it's not easy. At the end of the day, we're just these basic human beings bumbling our way down this pathway of life. And there's these, uh, people hiding in the bushes that grab us and take us off the path. And and their emotions like greed and anger and whatever. In fact, I'll show you something interesting. I have a little notebook that I carry around with me, and on the front of my notebook, I have this little thing pasted on there, and it says, "Am I being the person I want to be right now?" And then I list who is that person. Now, I've been carrying this around for years because I have to keep reminding myself, who am I at my best? Because the world will take me out of my best. So who would think that, someone who's the CEO of a public company would have to have this written on their notepad? Well, it's because I'm human. And it says, who is this person? It says, I want to be grateful, caring, empathetic, reasonable, a listener, fact based. I want to have a balanced opinion. I want to be curious. I want to be a learner. And I want to throw sunshine, not a shadow. And I have to have that because I could be meeting with you, Patrick, and
Mhm.
we could be going through something, and then I have another meeting with someone else. I don't want to take my leftovers to that person. I want to take my full self to that person. And sometimes we're in situations where some of these behaviors get stolen away from me, and I have to be aware of that. So I think to those listening out there right now, you have to be deliberate about this. And it does make a difference because people do have happier lives if they go home happy.
It's funny you call it like the leftovers, because we do kind of do that, right? By the time I get to the fifth or sixth meeting of the day, I've carried all this frustration, anxiety, disappointment, whatever it might be. The stuff that not always, the leftovers aren't always the tastiest morsels, right? They're the stuff that kind of like carry as baggage, and I drag it through every meeting. And by the time, if that's why people are like, oh, don't be on the schedule with Patrick, at the end of the day, it's not a good time to show up, type of thing. I love that idea of like consciously reminding ourselves, however you do it. Like, you do it with the note on the front of your pad. Other people might do it with a mantra they say to themselves, or a deep breath they take before they walk in a room, or whatever it might be. But choosing in that moment to show up to be the person that team needs at that moment is a lot different than being one saying, let me unpack everything that frustrated me the last time I walked in a meeting room.
Absolutely. Marshall Goldsmith wrote a great book called Triggers,
Mm-hmm.
and it talks about the triggers that set you off, and you need to be aware of them. And it's that pause that's really important. But you're right. Don't take your leftovers. If you're a leader, everybody deserves the full plate. So, do what you need to do to fill that plate up before you go on to do the next thing. I coach now, and I coach 7 CEOs at the moment. And the first thing we do is based around awareness. Is we go through a process to make that leader aware of what behaviors are getting in their way. And then the second part of the coaching is intention. So now we go through, on a 2 weekly basis, a list of things just like my little list. And I ask the person I'm coaching to grade themselves on a daily basis. Did I do my best to be a better listener today? Or did I do my best not to micromanage today? And at the end of the coaching practice, I go back to the stakeholders that, they're leading, and there has been change. And, so it's about awareness and being deliberate and intentional.
Well, I never ask you to disclose anything about the seven, nor would you, I'm sure. But when you, at the aggregate, I guess I would say, are there things that you're hearing CEOs talk about these days that are concerning, or maybe are positives that you're hearing them say? Like, what are you hearing, kind of as the general thinking around, among CEOs right now, about their role and about the world we're operating in?
The biggest thing is uncertainty. We can deal with risk, but it's really difficult dealing with uncertainty. And there's just a plethora of uncertainty out there right now. And I think that's what they're having to come to grips with. And uncertainty is a series of future events that may or may not occur. And unfortunately, we can't pick which ones will or won't occur. So I think that's something that is a big topic right now. But there is, I'm happy to see that there is a bigger uh, concentration these days on the importance of people within organizations. When we went through COVID, they called the activity as the Great Resignation.
Mm-hmm.
Of what it was, I wrote an article on LinkedIn about it. I called it the Great Escape. People were escaping toxic cultures because they didn't want to be there anymore. So there is a more of a focus today, I think, that we need to think about how do we build organizations that people really want to go to work every day.
It's funny too, because in the midst of all the unknowns out there and all that constant change and feeling like you don't know what's predictable, the one thing you can actually influence in that moment is what's going on within the four walls of your own business. I mean, and
Exactly.
not that you shouldn't think strategically and think about what's going to happen with new entrants, or what's going to happen with tariffs, or what's going to happen with any of this stuff. But at the same time, you have to put your arms around stuff you can control. I noticed that when you talk about culture, you use the term tribe, and you talk about
Yeah.
tribes. Why the term tribe? What does tribe mean to you? Why, words matter? Why do you choose that word?
Well, um, tribe is something you belong to. Tribalism goes back to the beginning of mankind. And so if you can play on a team, but if you have a tribe usually has a just cause. And our just cause was a group of people that came together to protect and feed each other. So if you think about attributes of a tribe, the number one responsibility of a tribal leader is to be a learner and a teacher, because we need to, equip our people through learning and teaching the best way to do the work that we do. Tribes have values. Tribes look at different skills within their group. There's some tribe members that are better fishermen and some are better hunters. Tribes celebrate, and tribes love learning. So I think again, you call it a clan, a family, or whatever, but and there's been a lot written around tribes that a group of people that come together and protect and feed each other, I think is really meaningful.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. When I was reading about you and getting ready for this, and I said it in the very beginning, that you're able to take values of the organization and make it just not artwork on the wall, because I think we've all seen that. I've been in places where I asked the senior leader or the CEO, tell me about your organization. They kind of spin the chair around and point to the wall, and it says integrity, loyalty, trust, communication, commitment, and have fun, or something written on the wall. And I like, that's great, but tell me about your culture, because sometimes what's happening out there, if you will, doesn't match what's written on that wall. Uh, I'd just love to hear you riff a bit about values. Like, why, from your perspective, how much do they matter? How much did you invest in defining them? How do you make them real? Those type of things would be so helpful to the
Yeah,
listener.
sure. Well, Values are there to guide behavior. And you're right, values should be written on the most coffee stained piece of paper in the organization because people need to rely on values to make decisions. In our case, these were embedded in the regular conversations we had with our tribe members. So, in the book that I wrote with Ken Blanchard called Helping People Win at Work, the byline is don't mark my paper, help me get an A. So, first we have to define what an A looks like. And then, at a minimum, every 90 days, we would sit down with those we had the privilege to lead, those that we were coaching, and we'd talk about how they were progressing to get that A, but also we'd have them share with us how did they live our values in the last 90 days. Tell us how you made a decision based on our number one value, which is we value doing the right thing, or the number two value, which was we value creating positive, lasting memories in all of our relationships. And I can give you sort of a nearly true practical example of how they work in both ways. I was in my leadership role one day and I was at a meeting and there was someone in the room, a leader that I know well, that was not creating positive, lasting memories that morning. They'd brought most of their leftovers to that meeting. And, as a leader, you could stop the meeting and say, Patrick, that behavior is unacceptable. Well, that's probably not going to do much good because everyone in the meeting is going to think about the time they're going to be publicly assassinated. You could do nothing, and that means that everyone would say we don't live our values. So when the meeting was over, I said to the person, let's go for a walk. So we walked outside of our building and I started looking in a trash can and behind a car. And this person said, what the hell are you doing, Garry? I said, I'm looking for you. The you I know and love was not in that room today. You live our values of creating positive, lasting memories every day, and you weren't living them today. And in fact, you didn't even visit them today. What's on your mind? What's getting in your way? How can I help you? So the values allow you to have that conversation.
Mm.
And every 90 days at minimum, we would sit down and people would share with it, well, this is how I created a positive, lasting memory in the last 90 days. This is how I made it better than it was yesterday. This is how I did the right thing. So eventually they become natural ways. And there wouldn't, I can remember many times we'd be sitting in meetings or having conversations and making decisions, and someone would say, yeah, let's just run that through our values. And that may make it easier for us to make that decision.
And did it? Would it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll give you another way how this works. Um, I was privileged enough to teach at USD for 16 years in the same master's program in the end that I did. And I did a class on building culture within an organization. And I used to take a case study into the classroom and I would divide the class into three groups. The first group would have a hierarchical set of values, which means here are your values and they are ranked. The most important one is number one. The second group would have a set of values and they weren't hierarchical. So you could, pick any one you like. And the third group, I say you can do whatever you want. The third group were excited because they left the room and they had to come back in half an hour and give us their recommendations on the case study. The third group were excited because they thought they had a free rein. The first group to come back was the one with the hierarchical set of values because they didn't spend their time arguing about what was right and what was wrong. So having these hierarchical values churn away. The last group to come back was the one with no values, and I think they were fighting at the end because they just couldn't decide how they were going to address this problem.
I've done those exercises before. It's probably helpful for all of us to do it at some point where you write down for yourself, like what do you value? And you might write down on a card one value, another card, another value, another card, another value. You've probably seen this exercise before. And then you're asked to discard one of those. And the idea is like, which one do you end up with at the end in your hand? And it's the one that really tells you what is the top of that hierarchy. And if you make decisions, whether it's individually or organizationally, that are not congruent with that card, all sorts of things go bad. First, between your ears, because you have that cognitive dissonance type of moment, but also organizationally because it starts reinforcing the wrong things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So they're very powerful. As I said, they're there to protect you and set you free, to do both.
It is amazing how so many things in life can protect us and set us free, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Hey, so when you think about Like if I were to ask you, Gary, pull out your crystal ball. Think about what are some of the biggest challenges the leaders who maybe are listening right now and will be in the C-suite 10 years over the next 10 years. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges they face?
Um, I think the biggest challenge they face is having the time and the continued patience to be able to build great cultures within their organization, because you can't sprinkle fairy dust on an organization and change the culture, and it's got to come from leadership. Patrick, fish actually rot from the head.
Hmm.
So leaders really need to put things in place that help people make decisions and help them to build great cultures through the two simple things of, do people belong and do they matter? Um, you know, we're going to go through different seasons of business. Stuff is going to go right and wrong, and that's just the way it goes. But again, if you can build a strong culture as you go through these seasons of change, your organization is going to be enduring. And we found that in WD-40 when COVID hit. Luckily we went in with a very strong culture and we came out with a very strong culture, and the company did very, very well because we were together solving the issues and the challenges on a daily basis. So uh, again, I think that it's really important that we think about building these places where people do want to go to work. And I was talking to someone yesterday, and they were stressed because they weren't looking forward to going to work on Monday. How horrible is that?
Yeah, if you want to get some people's attention, just write a LinkedIn article on it about, the Sunday drearies or whatever, and they will click on it because sadly, there's a lot of people experiencing those. Gary, as we wrap up the conversation, I always like to ask this question each guest just to hear what you have to say about it. People listening to the podcast are throughout their entire career. There's going to be some people who are early on, maybe they're still in schooling and they're just in school and they're just trying to learn more before they embark on their career. Other people are in the C-suite now and they're like, can I get a little bit of advice that'll be helpful? And then everywhere in between. And my question I like to ask is, what piece of advice do you have for people, regardless of where they are in that journey, that'll just help them to kind of take the next step forward?
Start thinking about your role as a coach, not a manager. And if you think about a great coach knows how to win the game. A great coach never runs onto the field and steals the ball. A great coach never goes to the podium and picks up the prize. A great coach spends a lot of time in the stinky locker room building trust with the organization. So you're not there to manage people, you're there to help people win. And I think number one, be a great coach. And number two, adopt the learning moment, which is the opportunity to get rid of fear in an organization and to look at every opportunity, positively or negatively, as an opportunity to grow.
Oh, that's great advice. Gary, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. I encourage people to pick up a copy of the book. As I mentioned, the title, Any Dumbass Can Do It, that just is right in my wheelhouse. So others out there who might find themselves maybe relating to that title might want to pick up a copy of the book. Gary, thanks so much for joining us.
There. Thanks, Patrick, for having me. It's been a delight.
Well, well, folks, that's all we have for this week's episode of C-Suite Conversations. Big thanks to Garry Ridge for joining me today to talk about his life, his work, his career, what he's learned at his time at WD-40, but even beyond that, about how you build effective cultures and how you can be a great coach. That's all I have for today. My name's Dr. Patrick Leddin. Now go make it a great day.